When my mother-in-law called me unfit, it wasn't the word itself that broke me. It was the quiet certainty in her voice, like she had already decided my baby didn't belong to me. I still remember that night. The baby monitor's soft static filled the room, and I was sitting at the edge of my bed, half awake, half dreaming. My son Eli was just 6 months old. I could hear his small breaths over the monitor, that sweet rhythmic sigh that made my heart swell even in exhaustion. Then my phone buzzed. It was her, Margaret, my husband's mother. She rarely called me directly, so I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Her voice came calm, almost syrupy. "You sound tired, dear. You've always looked overwhelmed lately. Maybe motherhood isn't quite what you imagined." I sat up, feeling a jolt of defensiveness. "I'm fine, Margaret. Just tired. New mom life," she hummed. Yes. But perhaps Eli deserves a bit more than tired. That was her way, never raising her voice, but slicing you open with politeness. I didn't know it then, but that was the first seed she planted, the seed that would grow into the biggest betrayal of my life. Before all of this, before courtrooms and papers and tears, my life was simple, ordinary, in the way that felt safe. My husband Daniel and I had been married for 3 years when Eli was born. We lived in a small 2-bedroom house on a quiet street, where the neighbors waved from their porches and the mailman knew everyone's names. I was a part-time teacher at the local preschool. Daniel worked in accounting, quiet and steady. When Eli came into our lives, everything shifted, the good kind of chaos. I'd spend hours just staring at him, memorizing his tiny fingers, the way his lips twitched in sleep. Daniel would come home and find me sitting in the rocking chair, whispering lullabies even after Eli had already drifted off. But between those peaceful moments, there were cracks. Small ones, the kind you ignore until they split open. Daniel loved our son, but he struggled with the noise, the mess, the unpredictability of a newborn. "You've changed," he'd say, half joking, when I'd forget to make dinner or when I'd fall asleep on the couch. "You used to smile more." And then there was Margaret. From the moment I announced my pregnancy, she had opinions about everything. The crib color, the feeding schedule, the name. "Eli sounds soft," she'd said. "You should pick something stronger." After Eli was born, she visited often. Too often. She'd bring casseroles, fold laundry, and make those helpful comments that landed like tiny darts. "You're not burping him right. Maybe he cries because he senses your anxiety. If you went back to work, he might thrive with structure." Daniel never saw it. To him, she was just being caring, a doting grandmother. But when she looked at me, I felt something else in her eyes. Pity, judgment, ownership. Still, I tried to be grateful. I told myself I was lucky to have help. Lucky to have a husband with a mother who cared. I didn't see what she was building. It started subtly. One morning, I came downstairs to find Margaret already in the kitchen, feeding Eli from a bottle. I froze in the doorway. I hadn't even heard her come in. "Oh," I said, forcing a smile. "You're early," she smiled back, unbothered. He was crying. Daniel gave me a spare key. Thought it'd be easier for me to help out. My stomach tightened. A spare key, without telling me. I didn't argue then. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. But something about the way she said "help out" made me uneasy, like she believed it was her right. Days later, I found her rearranging Eli's nursery. She'd replaced the soft blue curtains I picked with stiff white ones. His stuffed animals were gone, replaced by a framed photo of Daniel as a baby. "I thought this looked more proper," she said, smoothing the blanket on the crib. "Proper?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She smiled again, that perfect condescending smile. "Every child needs a sense of family legacy. Don't you agree?" It was the way she said "family," like she wasn't including me in it. Then came the papers. One afternoon, I caught Daniel sitting at the dining table, flipping through a manila envelope. He quickly slid it shut when I walked in. "What's that?" I asked. "Oh, just insurance forms," he said too quickly. But the next morning, while cleaning, I found one of the pages crumpled under the table. It wasn't insurance. It was a legal document, something about temporary guardianship. My name wasn't listed anywhere. I confronted him that night. "What is this, Daniel? Why is your mother's name on a guardianship form for Eli?" He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It's just in case, okay? My mom said it's good to have a backup." "You've been exhausted and what? You think I can't take care of my own baby?" He hesitated, eyes avoiding mine. "She just wants to help. You know how you've been lately. Forgetful, moody. It's not like you." I felt the ground tilt under me. "You're listening to her? About me? She's just concerned." Concerned. That word rang like a warning bell in my head. From that night on, something between us shifted. Daniel became distant, quieter. Margaret visited daily, sometimes staying overnight to give me rest. And slowly, I started feeling like a guest in my own home. I tried to push back. I set boundaries, asked her to call before coming, reminded Daniel that I was fine. But every time, he'd say, "You're overreacting." Overreacting, the word men use when they want you to doubt yourself. Still, I held on. I told myself it was just a phase, that love would steady us again. But love, I learned, can be rewritten. And I was about to watch mine erased in ink and signatures. It happened on a Tuesday. The morning was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that makes you nervous. I remember the smell of oatmeal burning on the stove, the faint hum of the refrigerator. I went to check on Eli's crib, but it was empty. At first, I thought Daniel had taken him for a walk. He'd done that before, early in the mornings. But his stroller was still by the door. His diaper bag, too. "Daniel?" I called out. No answer. My heart began to pound. I ran to the living room, nothing. The house felt wrong, too still, too hollow. Then I noticed something on the coffee table. A note, written in Margaret's looping handwriting. "Don't worry. Eli is safe with me. You need rest, no address, no explanation. Just that." I called Daniel immediately, but he didn't pick up. I tried again, voicemail. By the third call, my hands were shaking. When he finally answered, his voice was calm. Too calm. "Where's Eli?" I demanded. "With my mom," he said. "She thought it'd be best if you had a few days to yourself." "A few days?" Without asking me. "Please don't make this a big deal," he sighed. "You've been struggling. Mom thinks..." "Stop saying what she thinks. He's my son, Daniel." There was a pause. And then he said it. The sentence that split my world in two. "He's our son. And we're both deciding what's best for him." I felt my knees give out. "You can't just take him away?" "It's not forever. Just until things are stable again." But the way he said it, the detached tone, it didn't sound temporary. It sounded final. I drove to Margaret's house that same hour, barely remembering the turns. When I pulled up, she was on the porch, rocking Eli in her arms. He was dressed in a new onesie I hadn't bought, pale yellow, embroidered with her initials. "Give him to me," I said, voice trembling. She looked up, her expression soft, like she was the calm one, and I was hysterical. "Sweetheart, you're not well. Look at yourself. Give me my baby." She clutched him closer. "He's fine here. You're exhausted." Daniel and I agreed that, Daniel and you. My throat burned. "You don't get to agree anything about my child." Her tone stayed maddeningly calm. "I raised Daniel alone, remember? I know what I'm doing. You should trust me. You can visit anytime." I felt something in me snap. "Visit? He's my son, Margaret." "You're not keeping him." For the first time, her face hardened. "You can call him that all you want, but you're not behaving like a mother. A real mother wouldn't be so emotional." I reached for Eli, but she stepped back, and that's when Daniel appeared behind her, holding a folder. "Please, just go home," he said quietly. "We've talked to a lawyer. Mom can have temporary guardianship. It's for Eli's safety." The word lawyer hit me like a blow. You talked to a lawyer? Without me?" He looked down. "You left him crying for hours last week." "Mom said I didn't. My voice broke. "You believe her over me?" "She's just trying to help," he said again. I wanted to scream, to tear the world apart until someone listened. But all I could do was stand there, watching as Margaret gently rocked my baby, humming softly like she'd done it all her life. That night, I sat in my car outside their house, watching the light from Eli's nursery window. I could see Margaret's silhouette moving back and forth. My body ached from crying. I felt like the world had stopped. Like I'd been erased from my own life. Days passed before Daniel came home. When he did, he acted as though nothing monumental had happened. He asked if I'd eaten, if I'd slept. "I'm not hungry," I said flatly. "Where's Eli?" "With Mom." "Daniel," I whispered, "you have to bring him home." He didn't look at me. "Not until we're sure you're stable." I almost laughed. A sharp, broken sound. "Stable? Because I want my child back?" "You're being irrational." "No," I said, stepping closer, trembling. "You're being manipulated." His jaw tightened. "You always make her the villain. She's done nothing but care for us." "Us?" I said. "Or just you?" He didn't answer, just grabbed his jacket and left again. That night, I went through the drawer where we kept important papers, birth certificate, hospital forms. But when I reached for Eli's documents, they were gone, every single one. I tore through the drawers, the files, the baby box, nothing. And then, at the bottom of Daniel's briefcase, I found a new envelope stamped with a law firm's name. My stomach turned as I unfolded the paper. It was a petition for adoption, filed under Margaret's name, and Daniel's signature was already there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor, clutching Eli's empty blanket, the smell of his baby lotion still faint on the fabric. My mind was racing. How could they do this? How could a mother's love be rewritten by lies and paperwork? But by dawn, something inside me hardened. If they wanted to play legal games, fine. I'd fight on their terms. The next morning, I went to see a lawyer. Her name was Ms. Rivera. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, but kind. I remember her first words after I explained everything. "They can't do that," she said firmly. "A parent can't be stripped of custody without due process." "But," she paused, "if they've already filed papers, you need to act fast." Her confidence gave me a lifeline. We drafted an emergency motion, gathered proof, texts, photos, medical records, anything that showed I'd been Eli's primary caregiver. But as I was leaving her office, she handed me a piece of advice that would stay with me. "Keep your composure," she said. "Women lose these battles not because they're wrong, but because they look emotional. Don't give them that weapon." It was hard advice to swallow, but she was right. So I played calm. On the outside, at least. When Daniel came home that night, I was cooking dinner, just like old times. The smell of garlic filled the air. I smiled, even though my hands were trembling. He hesitated, studying me. "You're calm," I shrugged. "Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe I do need rest." He nodded slowly, uncertain. Inside, though, I was already building my plan. They wanted to make me look unstable, emotional, unfit. So I'd give them none of that. I'd give them silence and strategy, because they might have taken my baby. But I was still his mother, and a mother, when cornered, doesn't crumble. She fights. I learned something during that time. When people try to take your child, they don't just attack your motherhood, they attack your sanity. Every glance, every whisper, every missing document, it all made me question myself. And that was exactly what Margaret wanted, but I didn't break. Instead, I started documenting everything. Every message she sent, every visit she made, every time Daniel mentioned guardianship or temporary custody. I saved screenshots, took photos of Eli's room before she changed it, kept receipts for his doctor visits. Ms. Rivera helped me file for an emergency custody hearing. "The court needs to see you're the stable one," she said. "So stay calm, stay consistent. No yelling, no scenes." That was the hardest part, because inside, I was anything but calm. At night, I'd lie awake staring at Eli's empty crib, tracing the pattern of the mobile with my eyes. The silence hurt the most, the absence of his soft babbling, his small fists reaching out in sleep. Sometimes I'd press my ear to the baby monitor, still plugged in, as if I could hear him through the airwaves. It was madness, I know, but grief makes you do strange things. And still, I planned. One afternoon, I called Daniel. "I want to visit Eli," I said quietly. He sighed. "Mom says I'm not asking her, Daniel." "I'm telling you." There was a long pause. "Fine," he said at last. "Tomorrow, but only for an hour." I swallowed my pride. "That's enough." The next day, I drove to Margaret's house, wearing my calmest smile and holding a gift bag full of baby clothes. When she opened the door, she looked surprised. "Oh," she said, clutching her pearls. "I wasn't expecting you." "I just wanted to see him," I said softly. "Nothing more." She hesitated, then stepped aside. Eli was in his playpen, gurgling happily. When he saw me, his little arms shot up, his face breaking into a grin, that toothless smile that had once been my whole world. My chest ached. I knelt beside him, inhaling that sweet baby scent, trying to memorize it all over again. Margaret hovered in the background like a shadow. "You know," she said, her voice smooth. "He's been sleeping through the night here. I think the quiet agrees with him." I looked up at her. "That's because he feels safe. Babies always do when they're loved." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Exactly. The tension in that room was sharp enough to slice through glass. But I stayed still, collected. When I left, I made sure to snap a few photos of Eli's room. Quietly, discreetly. The nameplate on the wall caught my eye. It didn't say Eli, it said Elias Daniel. My breath caught. They'd changed his name. That night, I called Ms. Rivera again. My voice trembled, but my resolve didn't. They changed his name. On the nursery wall, what if they've changed it legally too? There was a pause, then a low sigh. It's possible. If your husband signed off, they could have filed for a name amendment during the adoption petition. We'll find out. She was right. The next week, she confirmed it. Margaret had filed a name change request, claiming Daniel's written consent. That was the moment something inside me shifted. The heartbreak transformed into fury. Quiet, calculated fury. They had tried to rewrite my child, so I began preparing for battle. I stopped calling Daniel. I stopped pleading. I went silent. The kind of silence that unnerves people who expect you to scream. Instead, I focused on the hearing. Ms. Rivera coached me through every question the judge might ask. How do you plan to prove emotional stability? What evidence do you have of coercion or manipulation? What's your plan for Eli's care if custody is restored? I had answers for everything. I built a binder the size of a Bible. Photos, texts, screenshots, receipts. Proof that I'd been there for every fever, every appointment, every lullaby. The night before the hearing, Daniel called me for the first time in weeks. "Mom says we should try to settle this privately," he began. "We don't need lawyers." I let out a quiet breath. "You already made it legal, Daniel," he hesitated. "She didn't mean to hurt you, she just thinks she can do better." "Better?" I repeated softly. "Better than a mother?" He didn't answer. "Tell me something," I said. "When you look at her holding Eli, do you really believe that's where he belongs? Or do you just want to avoid conflict?" His silence was answer enough. The next morning, I stood before the courthouse. Gray stone, tall columns, the kind of place where justice feels both possible and unreachable. Inside, the air was cold. Margaret sat at the opposite table, perfectly dressed, hands folded, her lawyer whispering in her ear. Daniel sat beside her, his eyes avoiding mine. When the judge called my name, I stood. My knees shook, but my voice didn't. I told the truth. How she'd taken my baby without consent, how she'd manipulated my husband, replaced my name on documents, changed my son's room, even filed to rename him. Margaret's lawyer tried to paint me as unstable, overwhelmed, emotional, a young mother in distress. But Ms. Rivera countered every point, calmly, precisely. When the judge asked if I had proof, I handed over the binder. The room went quiet as the pages turned. Photos of Eli in my arms, dated hospital forms, voice messages from Daniel saying, "You're the best mom." Then came the kicker, a screenshot of Margaret's text from that first morning. "Don't worry. Eli is safe with me. You need rest. The judge's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Carter, did you send this message? Margaret hesitated, then nodded. And you admit you took the child without the mother's consent? Her lawyer whispered something urgently, but she waved him off. It was temporary. She wasn't doing well. The judge leaned forward. That's not your decision to make. When the hearing ended, the ruling was clear. Full custody restored to me. I remember walking out of that courtroom in silence, the cool air hitting my face. For the first time in months, I could breathe, but victory didn't feel like joy. It felt like exhaustion, like crawling out of a dark well after almost drowning. Still, I was free, and my baby was coming home. That evening, Daniel came by with Eli in his arms. He didn't say much, just handed him to me, eyes red. I didn't know she'd gone that far, he said quietly. I thought she just wanted to help. I didn't answer. I just held my son close, feeling the warmth of his little body against my chest. His head fit perfectly under my chin, like it always had. He smelled like baby powder in someone else's house. But as I rocked him, that familiar rhythm came back. The heartbeat, the breath, the belonging. He was home. You'd think that after winning in court, the storm would finally pass, that the truth being out would bring peace. But peace doesn't arrive when justice is served. It comes slowly, awkwardly, like a guest who's not sure if they're welcome. In our small town, word spread fast. People whispered, not cruelly but curiously. The story of the mother-in-law who tried to adopt her own grandson became the unspoken topic over church lunches and supermarket aisles. Margaret's name, once said with admiration, and started to carry a different weight, the kind of weight that comes from shame. At the post office, I overheard two women talking. Can you believe she filed papers behind her daughter-in-law's back? I always said she liked to control everything. I didn't feel joy hearing it. I didn't want to be vindicated through gossip, but part of me, the part that had cried into empty baby blankets, felt something close to relief. People finally saw what I had been living through. Daniel tried to mend things at first. He started coming home early, offering to help with bedtime. He'd cook dinner, hum lullabies the way I used to, but his presence felt tentative, like someone walking on eggshells, unsure where to step. One night, after Eli had fallen asleep, he sat across from me at the kitchen table. The air smelled faintly of chamomile tea and baby lotion, the quiet smells of a home trying to heal. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice cracked. I didn't think it would go that far. I didn't respond right away. The clock ticked between us. You signed those papers, Daniel, I said softly. You didn't just let her go that far. You helped her. He rubbed his face, exhausted. She said you were losing it, that you'd collapse if someone didn't step in. I thought I was doing the right thing. I stared at him, really seeing him, not my husband, not my betrayer, but the man who had always needed someone stronger to make decisions for him. First his mother, then me. You didn't protect me, I whispered. Or Eli. You just wanted peace. He looked down, ashamed. I know. There was nothing else to say. Margaret tried to salvage her reputation. She told friends it was all a misunderstanding, that she only wanted to secure the baby's future. But no one quite believed her. At church, people began to distance themselves. The pastor's wife, who used to sit beside her every Sunday, started sitting 2 pews back. Once, after service, I caught sight of her watching me from across the courtyard. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried something raw. Bitterness, maybe, or guilt. She walked up to me, her pearls gleaming in the sunlight. You've embarrassed this family, she said quietly, so no one else could hear. I met her gaze. You did that yourself, Margaret. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You think you've won, but one day Eli will grow up. He'll hear both sides. Then I hope, I said softly. He'll see which one of us loved him without trying to own him. She flinched, not visibly, but enough for me to see it in her eyes. That was the last real conversation we ever had. After that, she stopped showing up at family gatherings. Daniel would visit her sometimes, but never with Eli. When I asked him why, he just said, She can't face him. Not yet, I didn't push. Some wounds, I learned, can only be tended in silence. Months passed. Eli grew, chubby legs, curious eyes, laughter that filled every corner of the house. Every time I rocked him, I felt the tremor of those lost months fade a little more. But healing wasn't just about getting my baby back. It was about reclaiming myself. I went back to teaching part-time, surrounded by children's laughter, finger paints, and the scent of crayons. It felt grounding, a reminder that I was capable, reliable, whole. Sometimes when parents dropped off their kids, I'd catch the nervous glances, the polite sympathy. They knew my story. I didn't mind. If anything, I hoped it made them hold their children tighter. Then one evening, Daniel came home with something unexpected. A letter. It's from Mom, he said, his voice unreadable. I hesitated before opening it. The paper smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, the same scent that used to linger on Eli's clothes after she held him. The handwriting was familiar, elegant. Dear Lily, you'll never believe me, but I truly thought I was helping. I saw you drowning in exhaustion, and I thought love meant stepping in. I see now that I took too much. I wanted to relive motherhood, not realizing I was stealing yours. I'm sorry. Tell Eli I love him. I'll give you space. Maybe someday, you'll let me see him again. Not as his mother, but as his grandmother. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. My heart was conflicted, between anger and something softer. I didn't forgive her then. But for the first time, I believe she understood. Time has a strange way of dulling what once felt unbearable. By Eli's 2nd birthday, the house was filled with laughter again. My parents, my sister, a few close friends. Balloons in every shade of blue floated against the ceiling. The cake was messy, the frosting uneven, but it was ours. Daniel helped set up the decorations, quieter than he used to be, more deliberate. Our marriage was no longer the same, fractured but functional. We were rebuilding, carefully. When Eli blew out his candle, I looked at his little face, his cheeks puffed with excitement. For a moment, everything was still. The noise, the memories, all fading into the background. He was safe. After the party, as I was cleaning up, I found a small card tucked under the door. No name, just a simple message in neat handwriting. Happy birthday, Eli. Grandma loves you. No address, no intrusion, just that. And for once, I didn't feel anger. Only a quiet sadness, and maybe a trace of forgiveness. The people in our town eventually moved on to other stories. New scandals, new whispers. But sometimes when I walk past the courthouse or the church, I think about how close I came to losing everything. Not just my baby, but the truth of who I was. Because motherhood isn't something that can be signed away. It's not ink on paper or what last name a child carries. It's the endless nights, the lullabies, the way your arms know the exact curve of your child's weight. No one can take that, not even family. The months that followed felt like learning how to breathe again. Not the quick, shallow gasps I'd been living on, but full, steady breaths that filled the lungs and didn't ache on the way out. Eli was walking now, his little feet padding against the wooden floor. Every sound he made, every laugh, every mama, felt like a thread stitching me back together. I stopped checking the courthouse website for updates. I stopped saving every piece of evidence like a woman waiting for another fight. The war was over. Instead, I started journaling, something my therapist suggested. Every night after Eli was asleep, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and write down 3 things that made me feel grateful. At first, it felt forced. But over time, the list grew longer. The smell of Eli's hair after a bath, the quiet hum of the washing machine, the way the morning light hit the kitchen counter, turning everything gold. Little things, ordinary things, the kind of things that once got buried under chaos. Daniel and I were different, not broken exactly, but changed, like 2 trees that had grown apart after a storm. Their roots still tangled underground, but their branches facing separate skies. We tried counseling for a while. Some sessions ended in tears, some in silence. but even silence can be honest. I can't promise I'll ever trust you the same way, I told him once, my voice trembling. He nodded. I know, but I'll keep trying anyway, and he did. He started showing up in small ways. Early morning bottles, late-night lullabies, tiny apologies that didn't need words. I didn't know if love could fully rebuild after betrayal. But forgiveness, I realized, wasn't always about the other person. Sometimes it's about freeing yourself from what they did. One spring morning, a year after the court ruling, I got a call from Margaret. I almost didn't answer, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe grace, made me pick up. Hello? Her voice was soft, unfamiliar in its fragility. It's me. I wanted to thank you. For what? For letting Daniel bring Eli by last week. I froze. You saw him? Yes, just for a few minutes. He showed me his little cars. He called me Grandma. Her voice cracked then. I didn't deserve that. There was a long silence between us. For the first time, she didn't sound like the woman who had controlled every conversation. She sounded small, human. I never hated you, Margaret, I said quietly. I just needed you to understand that love isn't possession. I do now, she whispered. I think I was lonely, and I mistook control for care. I didn't have words for that, so I just said, Eli's safe. That's what matters. She let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. You're a good mother, Lily. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the baby monitor, the same one that had once broadcasted static and fear. Now, it was filled with soft breathing, peaceful, steady. That night, I told Daniel about the call. She's trying, he said. I think losing everything made her see what mattered. I nodded. Sometimes it takes breaking to learn where the cracks really are. He looked at me for a long time, then said softly, You've changed, Lily. You're stronger. I smiled faintly. I had to be. The seasons rolled on. Life settled into something I hadn't felt in years. Calm. Eli started preschool. The first day, he ran into the classroom without looking back. My heart ached and swelled all at once. I stood there for a moment, clutching the strap of my purse, watching as he joined the circle of children. He didn't remember the chaos he'd been born into. He didn't remember the lawyers, the fights, or the nights I sat alone crying into his baby blanket. All he knew was that his mother loved him, completely, quietly, fiercely. That was enough. Sometimes, when I'm rocking him before bed, I think about how fragile the word mother really is. How easily people can try to define it, with judgments, with papers, with rules. But motherhood isn't a title. It's a presence. It's the way your heart races when you hear your child cry. It's the instinct that wakes you up before the baby monitor does. It's the small sacred promise whispered every night. I'm here. You're safe. No law can give that. No one can steal it. One evening, while cleaning out an old box, I found the framed photo Margaret had put in Eli's nursery, the one of Daniel as a baby. For a moment, I just stared at it. I could see where it all began. Her fear of losing the one person she'd built her whole life around. Maybe she thought she was saving Eli from the same loneliness she'd once felt. People do terrible things when they mistake fear for love. Instead of throwing it away, I placed that photo on Eli's bookshelf, beside his storybooks and toy cars. Because no matter what happened, she was still part of his story, a painful part, but still a part. That night, as Eli slept, I sat by his crib, the soft hum of the nightlight filling the room. His hand rested open beside him, trusting, unguarded, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to fight anymore. I just felt home. Sometimes when I look back at everything that happened, the lies, the courtrooms, the sleepless nights, I wonder how I ever found the strength to keep going. But then I remember that strength isn't something you wake up with one morning. It grows quietly, in the moments no one sees, in the tears you wipe away before anyone notices, in the nights you whisper to yourself, just one more day. In the choice to love your child even when the world feels like it's turning against you. That's what motherhood really is. Not perfection, not paperwork, not control. just love that refuses to give up. If I learned anything from my story, it's this. Sometimes, the people who claim to know what's best for you are really trying to protect their own fears. They'll call it love, but love never takes away someone's voice. Real love gives it back. Margaret taught me that, not in the way she intended, but in the way I needed to learn. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from revenge or victory. It comes from understanding, and in that understanding, there's peace. Now, when I tuck Eli into bed, I don't see the child who was almost taken from me. I see the little boy who made me braver than I ever thought I could be, and I whisper the same words every night. You're mine, and I'm yours. Always. No court can rewrite that. No betrayal can erase it. It's written in something stronger than ink. Love. So tell me. If you were in my place, would you have forgiven her? Would you have answered that phone call? Or closed that chapter forever? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Real voices, real emotions, and lessons that stay long after the story ends. Until next time, take care of your heart. And remember, sometimes the hardest battles lead to the gentlest kinds of peace.